Good morning and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up today, Israeli forces raid West Bank city of Jenin, target Nuseirat refugee camp in Gaza. Yemen's Houthis wade into Israel-Hamas war as Bolivia severs diplomatic ties. Plus, leaders of Germany and Ghana call for United Nations reform amidst Ukraine-Israel conflict. And first we begin with gunfire heard ringing across the Israeli-occupied West Bank city of Jenin early this morning as Israeli forces raided the city. A day earlier, Hamas and Islamic Jihad say they were engaged in a battle with Israeli forces in Jenin, where the Palestinian Health Ministry reports 4 people were killed on Monday. Following 18 months of steadily escalating violence in the West Bank, Israeli forces have clamped down further since the October 7 attack, making hundreds of arrests and conducting regular raids that have resulted in clashes. At least 121 Palestinians have been killed there in the 3 weeks since the attack. Rescuers have been looking for survivors buried under heavy rubble after intense Israeli shelling struck the Nuseirat refugee camp in the center of Gaza. Israeli forces were targeting a wedding hall that had become a shelter for displaced people, leaving dozens dead and several injured, according to local reports, in their pursuit of Hamas. One of Israel's military spokespeople, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, has confirmed that the airstrikes on Jabalia refugee camp says it targeted a central Hamas stronghold. According to Palestinian health officials, at least 50 Palestinians were killed when Israeli airstrikes hit the densely populated refugee camp in North Gaza early on Tuesday. Officials at Gaza's Indonesian hospital add that 150 people were wounded when tons of aerial explosives struck residential dwellings in the heart of the Jabalia camp in urbanized North Gaza. The Israeli military have accused Hamas, which rules a narrow coastal territory, of using civilian buildings as cover for fighters, commanders, and weaponry. Hamas denies this. A Hamas statement says there are 400 dead and injured in Jabalia, which lies on Gaza City's outskirts within the main northern ground zone of combat between dug-in Hamas and Israeli troops and tanks. Jabalia houses families of refugees from wars with Israel dating back to 1948. As the sun set over Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp on Tuesday, rescuers searched for survivors under the rubble of a 6-story residential building that was struck by Israeli airstrikes. Residents of the area said at least 41 people were killed in the attack and dozens more were still under the rubble. Israeli tanks have been acting in Gaza for at least 4 days following weeks of air bombardments. Missiles could be seen falling into Gaza on Tuesday night with explosions and occasional gunfire, as the United States and other countries say they're looking at options for the future of the Strip. Israel has vowed to wipe out Hamas for the worst assault on Jews since the Holocaust on October the 7th, with a relentless onslaught in the Gaza Strip. It does not, however, appear to have an obvious endgame in sight, according to some reports. Now, Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi group claimed it launched a large number of drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel on Tuesday, after Israel's military said it downed an approaching aerial target off the Red Sea city of Eilat. The operation was the third targeting Israel, and there will be more, according to the Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Sari. After an initial warning of a possible hostile aircraft intrusion, which sent residents of the tourist resort running for shelter earlier on Tuesday, the Israeli military had said its systems identified an aerial target approaching Israeli territory. It added that there was no threat or risk to civilians and the defensive action was successful, there were no reports of any missiles or drones hitting Israeli territory from the Red Sea on Tuesday. Yemen's Houthi leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi had warned on October the 10th that if the U.S. intervenes in the conflict, the group will respond by firing drones and missiles and take other military options. Chilean and Colombian governments have recalled their ambassadors to Israel for consultations after, according to them, Israel violated international humanitarian law in the Gaza Strip. Chile called for a ceasefire and the passage of humanitarian aid into the zone, while the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, called the attack a massacre of the Palestinian people in a post on the social media network X. Other Latin American neighbors, such as Mexico and Brazil, have also recently called for a ceasefire. Early on Tuesday, Bolivia broke ties with Israel, citing crimes against humanity. Israel's foreign ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment regarding the three countries' decisions. Bolivia is amongst the first countries to actively break diplomatic relations with Israel over its war in Gaza, a retaliation for the October 7 attack in southern Israel by Hamas. The South American country had previously cut diplomatic ties with Israel in 2009 under the government of leftist President Evo Morales, also in protest of Israel's actions in Gaza in 2020. The government of right-wing interim President Jeanine Áñez re-established ties. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been urging for permanent African representation on the UN Security Council during a state visit to Ghana on Tuesday, while Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo pointed to a veto-wielding aggressors in conflicts like Ukraine and Israel as reasons for reform. Mr. Scholz kicked off the two-state visit to sub-Saharan Africa in Nigeria on Sunday and arrived in Ghana's capital Accra late on Monday. It is his third trip to the region in 2 years. During the welcome ceremony at Jubilee House, Ghana's seat of government, Mr. Scholz highlighted what he called Germany and Ghana's shared commitment to rules-based international order. He lauded the recent inclusion of the African Union in the G20, but said permanent African positions on the UN Security Council also are needed. President Akufo-Addo called for broader reform.
I think we have all seen in recent times that the Council, in many ways, is not fit for purpose in dealing with questions to do with international peace and security. The classic example is what is happening over the Ukraine conflict, where the nation that is the aggressor is also the veto-wielding country and which is blocking any initiatives that the Security Council can take over the conflict. In the same way, we were very clear and vocal in our condemnation of the attack on Israel on the 7th of October by the Hamas organization, and recognized fully Israel's right to protect itself and defend itself. But at the same time, you look at the humanitarian consequences of what is going on over there. There's clearly a need for us, all of us, the international community, the global community, to look beyond the immediate issues of the consequences of the Hamas attacks on Israel, to be looking at the possibility of a comprehensive settlement of this matter.
President of Ghana, Mr. Nana Akufo-Addo, the United States is sending an additional 300 troops to the Middle East with a focus on providing support in areas such as explosive ordnance disposal and communications. According to Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Patrick Ryder, the troops will be going from the United States but will not be in Israel.
Moving to other updates, today I can announce the decision to deploy an additional 300 troops to the U.S. Central Command region from home stations in the continental United States. These additional troops will provide capabilities in explosive ordnance disposal, communications, and other support enablers for forces already in the region. Please note that we will not discuss specific deployment locations for these forces, but I can confirm they are not going to Israel and that they are intended to support regional deterrence efforts and further bolster U.S. force protection capabilities. Again, we'll continue to keep you updated. What I'm tracking right now is since our self-defense strikes on 26 October, there have been 6 additional, what I would consider small-scale attacks, 3 in Iraq, 3 in Syria. Right now, we're tracking a total of 27 attacks, 16 in Iraq, 11 in Syria. Again, as we see the data miner alerts pop up, we check each of those with CENTCOM, go back to verify the information, and as that information is either verified or batted down, we'll make sure to let you know. In some cases, they just didn't strike anything. Yeah. Again, to my knowledge, no injuries, no damaged infrastructure.
Now we bring in Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, public affairs analyst who joins us from Lagos, southwest Nigeria. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Olumide. Thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you. Let's begin with the Pentagon spokesperson that we have just heard, Brigadier General Patrick Ryder. So he was giving us an update on what's happening as far as the U.S. is concerned. 300 troops in addition to bolster U.S. support for Israel, but saying that they will not be in the country. He also spoke about what's happening concerning the attacks on U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq. So it seems as though the U.S., though not involved, are involved.
I mean, it's impossible to not blame the U.S. in anything that happens in the world. They're the world's police. And so for me, I think they're doing the right thing, because you don't want this war to escalate. You don't want a situation where all sort of things are happening from all sort of places. So there's a need for them to show their presence and say, look, we're here, and let us be careful so that we don't have this spiraling out of hand. So already they had sent a first set of troops, and so naturally what they're seeing is, from the report they're getting, there's a need to sort of shore up or add to the number of the legs on ground. And so that's what they've done. And like I said, I believe it's the right thing to do, because it's important that every other party must understand that their involvement must sort of cautious involvement. They cannot afford to start doing things out of hand. And so I believe that the role the U.S. is playing right now is the right role to play. They're around, they're on ground, and they're saying, and we keep this as evil as possible.
It hasn't acted as a deterrent or succeeded as a deterrent to terror groups such as the Houthis, who in Yemen lobbed cruise missiles towards Israel about a week ago that landed at the border with Egypt, and now they've claimed responsibility for other missile attacks, which they say, as we have reported, is in response to the United States' involvement in the conflict. Israel is also facing a multidimensional threat, or tridimensional, if you like, from Syria, from the north with Lebanon and Hezbollah, and of course Gaza in the south. As this war continues, do you see these forces, such as Hezbollah, who we understand can be as many as 100,000 man strong, will engage Israel in a more vociferous manner than they have been doing? Or are they just testing the waters? But even though the attacks between Hezbollah and the Israeli army are getting more sporadic by the day?
As you described them, a terrorist group, and a stock in trade is what they're doing. They're doing what they would naturally do, scare people, destroy things, and if I want to use your word, test the waters, just to show that we're also here, and this is where we're not completely out of the matter. You see, the truth is, Israel clearly is strong, and everyone knows that, and they're careful the way they deal with Israel, because if they weren't, by now, they probably will have run over them. They will have come from all of the places, Syria, Yemen, and all of that, and ran over Israel. But it is clear that Israel can hold their own. Now, it is, like I said again, what America is doing is really nice, because truth is, in some way, America's presence there is also showing that Yemen, Syria, Hezbollah, careful what you do because we're here as well, and you cannot afford to just misbehave. Truth of the matter is we cannot but realize and recognize that these people are terrorists, and their manner of doing things is always against what one would call common sense. And so whatever can be done, make sure that they're deterred, that they're shown that look, you cannot misbehave, must be done. You know, so shooting sporadically, attacking sporadically, as I said earlier, is their stock in trade. That's what they do for a living. That's what they do on a daily basis. And that's why Israel must also continue to up their games and do whatever they can do to ensure that they protect themselves and show that whatever is being done right now not allowed to spiral out of hand.
What's your reaction to the South American country Bolivia severing ties with Israel diplomatically, citing a massacre in Gaza, and also Chile and Colombia recalling their ambassadors? Even Turkey haven't recalled their ambassador, even though Israel recalled their envoy to Turkey, who have now become, well, through the president, Recep Erdogan, critics of the Netanyahu administration and the Gaza conflict.
Now, as much as Israel got the right to protect their territory and do what is right to show strength and all of that, I am a believer in the fact that they also must be cautioned. They must not be allowed to misbehave and allowed to do anything against the human race. So whatever can be done. I mean, I believe very strongly since I came across this in secondary school, class 2, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so no group of people or individual must be allowed to believe that they have absolute power and that whatever they do is completely right and nobody can caution them, nobody can, sort of say, raise hands of objection. So I believe that whatever needs to be done to ensure that Israel is also kept on the caution trail as they deal with protect their territory and do whatever they have to do, they also must be cautious and not do things out of hand. So I agree completely that those who need support diplomatic tasks so that they can send a signal to them that you cannot, commit a human massacre and be allowed to go scot-free. It's a delicate situation. You need to protect their territory against all these terrorists that surround them all over the place, but they also must be cautious in the way they carry it out so that they do not do anything against the human race. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, whether you are from the Palestinian or from Nigeria or from wherever in the world.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel equates a ceasefire that is being called for with an admission of submission or surrender to Hamas. Are you in agreement with that opinion, with that position?
No, I'm not.
And he says that that will not happen and that they'll fight to victory.
Which is why everybody, as we agree that they need to protect their territory and show strength, must also continue to tell them that when they're doing wrong, we must shout it out. Everybody must. You see, one of the matter is, I mean, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu must understand that we all agree that he has strength and he can wipe them out. But the truth is, they're human beings there. Unfortunately, they are related to some terrorists. And unfortunately, when you live or are related to terrorists, sometimes, whatever happens to those terrorists will happen to you. So there's a lot of caution here. Truth be told here, and I must say this very unequivocally, I do not envy the position of Israel. They're living in a situation where they sleep and wake up amongst terrorists. People who are wicked, who do not mind what they do, destroy and take other people out. But they need to manage it. They need to be careful. They need to be very, very careful as they manage their relationship amongst people. Whilst they show strength, they must also show empathy. They must also be very human way they deal with these things, because at the end of the day, that is very, very critical.
Okay, so let's delve a little deeper now into the reasons why the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, and the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and the Israeli authorities have said that this is a situation that they must see through to the end. They have given proof, or what they say is proof, of terrorist bunkers, control and command centers under Al-Shifa Hospital, one of the main hospitals. They have told the people that they should move from the north to the south so they can carry out their military campaign. They have said that if they do not wipe Hamas out, it'll be, well, Hamas will wipe them out, that it's either them or Hamas. They have said that they are facing an existential threat from Hamas, and Hamas continues to hold over 200 Israeli and other nationals hostage in Gaza. These are the reasons, some of the reasons that they give for this protracted onslaught, and the reason why it needs to continue to happen till they are sure that that threat is eliminated. What will you say to that?
Like I said earlier, I believe that they need to do what they have to do to make sure that we all in the world wipe out not just Hamas, any other terrorist group. And so, you know, they must carry that out and ensure that that is done. But my stand and plea is that as they do that, must do that with utmost caution, so that at the end of the day, they cannot come across, you know, as a terrorist. I'll give you a very, very simple example. You might think it's not very relevant, but that is an example that struck my head. So you want to punish your child, and back in the days, your parents would go ahead and say, go and stool down, go and do this, go and do that. Now, if one is not careful, that parents who go out of their way because they're trying to caution the children, use all sorts of measures, and at the end of the day, they permanently form their children. And the excuse is that they're trying to make sure they discipline their child. You can't kill somebody. I mean, the Yoruba people say you cannot want to, cure headache and cut off your head. So in trying to cure an headache, you should not, or you should be careful not to cut off your head. So Hamas and the rest of them, Hezbollah and the rest of them, are not good for the health of the world. They must be wiped out. They must be, taken out, and signals must be sent out to the rest of them who are thinking of going that way, that is not the way to go. But in doing that, Israel must try as much as they can, do it in a cautious way, so that they also will not be accused of killing other human beings and doing things against the human race.
Yes, we do understand that analogy. And we do thank you, Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, for your thoughts this morning. Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo is a public affairs analyst who joined us from Lagos. Many thanks.
Thanks so much, Father.
Still ahead, Jordanians rally for Gaza after refugee camp airstrikes. Stay with us. You're watching Israel-Hamas war on Channels Television. Families of Israeli hostages held by Hamas gathered in Tel Aviv on Tuesday carrying photographs of their loved ones, some carrying a sign calling for a ceasefire. Relatives have been worried since the military stepped up ground assaults inside the Palestinian territory. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with some of the families on Saturday, and in a video his office released, assured them that recovering the hostages is an integral part of the military's goals. Pressure is key, according to him. The greater the pressure, the greater the chances. Palestinian health officials say Israel's airstrikes and artillery fire have demolished large swathes of Gaza and killed more than 8,000 people in the last 3 weeks, including about 3,000 children. Nearly 2,000 Jordanians protested in support of Palestinians in Gaza following a deadly Israeli airstrike on a Palestinian refugee camp. They gathered at the Al-Kaluti Mosque in the capital Amman, near the Israeli embassy. The protest took place as Jordan's King Abdullah told U.S. President Joe Biden there was a need for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire that allows uninterrupted aid to the devastated Gaza enclave. In a royal palace statement, the monarch was quoted as saying he told President Biden efforts should be intensified to bring a halt to the war and pave the way for a political solution based on a two-state solution. The White House says 66 trucks of humanitarian assistance entered Gaza in the last 24 hours and dozens more are expected to be cleared for deliveries. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told reporters that President Biden will speak later with Jordan's King Abdullah for discussions about Gaza. 8 trucks have been trickled into Gaza from Egypt over the past week via Rafah, the main crossing that does not border Israel.
Humanitarian assistance, including food. Dozens of more trucks are expected to clear today. Expected to clear. I want to caveat it with that. We're obviously watching this as closely as we can. We hope that they all get in, but still, again, it's just a fraction of the need. We're also continuing to press for the resumption of essential services, including water and the delivery of fuel. Fuel is going to be critical here, certainly in coming hours and days, as the existing stocks are running low to near empty. And of course, we're supporting efforts for safe passage for civilians in Gaza and those wishing to depart, while making it clear that we will not support any forced relocation of Palestinians outside of Gaza. Now, to that end, and to all of those ends, President Biden will speak with His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan this afternoon to discuss further cooperation with Arab partners to address this worsening humanitarian situation. Without getting into this specific moment that we're in right now or litigating this from the White House podium, we do believe that humanitarian pauses could be of value, but they have to be, there has to be credible support on both sides here for where to do it, when to do it, for how long to do it, and for what purpose. And we're continuing to work with partners in the region, including those who have a direct line of communication with Hamas, to see if that's possible. The goal would be to get aid in, to maybe get people out that want to evacuate. It also would be valuable, a humanitarian pause every now and then would be valuable for us if, in fact, there is a serious effort to get hostages out.
Now joining us is Mr. Yinka Oyeneji, International Affairs Analyst, who's speaking to us virtually from East Midlands in the UK. Good morning and thank you for making out the time to be with us today.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Macaulay. Thanks for having me as well.
Whether you call it a humanitarian ceasefire, for which that language was tempered maybe to placate Israel, and call it a humanitarian pause, it will still be a measure of holding off of aggression so that these aid items can enter. But what can you do to convince Israel that that will not stop their military campaign against Hamas, and it will help to bring the hostages that they do have back home?
It's pretty dicey. It's not one that I would want to say I have the answers immediately, as much as I'd like to answer all your questions. But we have to look at all the factors. In one breath, we believe that Israel has the right to retaliate or to seek vengeance over what the Hamas have done, rightly so. This shows to be an opportunity for Israel to possibly restore confidence in its military might and, of course, in surveillance and intelligence gathering. So it's important for Israel to make a statement out of what has happened. As it is on the whole, Israel has lost the most. Israel has lost humans. Israel has lost assets. It's lost confidence. People live in trauma, even those who are still alive. Their families who have been robbed of their loved ones. Their families been reported too that their loved ones were decapitated and all of that. So it's justifiable For Israel to feel some kind of vengeance is ideal in the circumstances. There's no doubt about that. However, you want to benchmark that as against civilian casualties that are bound to also become casualties with respect to any retaliatory attacks on the Hamas. We cannot guarantee that it's not as though Hamas have a military base and you say it's military versus military. Already we see that retaliatory attacks by Israel has occasioned civilian casualties. In fact, the Hamas foot soldiers that Israel will go after probably surround themselves with soft targets of civilians, of helpless children, vulnerable women, and what have you. Now, you also want to benchmark all of this as against the rights of Hamas children and wives and vulnerable to life and to live well. So, as it is, Israel will ordinarily stand against any perceived humanitarian efforts to Hamas. Israel will not want to be a part of that. Must Israel retaliate? We almost cannot take that off the table, especially because there are Israeli citizens who are still held hostage by Hamas. The latest news we had yesterday was that Hamas was willing to return those who have been kidnapped. But would Hamas pay for what has happened? It almost is a foregone conclusion. So there would be, that being said, there will still be some humanitarian aid that will somehow reach Hamas and placate them or try to restore them from attacks that Israel is bound to envision or to bring upon them. So it won't be a lot of humanitarian aid going to Hamas. There will be trickles of it going there, very risky at that, but almost nobody is able to stop Israel from conducting retaliatory attacks on Hamas.
According to President Isaac Herzog of Israel, the 23-year-old German-Israeli lady, Shani Luk, that was taken hostage by Hamas and driven through the streets of Hamas, of Gaza, on a flatbed truck, and part of her body was exposed, and she was spat on, and that was uploaded to social media. It was on Twitter at the time. It was disclosed that she had eventually died, even though it was told to her mother that she could have been alive about a week ago, and her mother was appealing to the Germans, to the Israelis, and to Hamas that her daughter should be kept alive and be given medical assistance. President Isaac Herzog, in the last 24 hours, says that she was decapitated, her head was cut off. And that's the sort of atrocity that the Israelis suffered on October the 7th. And other cases, even though we hear that there's denial on the part of some Palestinians that it happened. What was the manner of the incursion into Israel and the targeting of elderly people and women and children? Is that obviously not one of the reasons why the situation has escalated to the point that it has?
Well, I would say that became a turning point. There's no doubt about it. It was barbaric, it was terrorism. We can't reduce it to any legitimacy. As a matter of fact, while we can understand that the Palestinians will always want to have their own state, and that has been happening for many years, from what history tells us in the Bible, this fight has been going on for a very long time. However, the manner of this violence brought upon Israel can never be justified. And while we may come to having a two-party state, in fact, that's the solution, I doubt whether it will even be this generation that will experience it, because there's no justification whatsoever for visiting terrorism against Israel and hoping to get away with it. It's not the basis for any negotiation. In fact, it leaves Hamas in a worse place. It leaves the entire countries in that region very, very reduced in terms of global standing. And so there cannot be any justification for all of this. There's many more pieces of bodies being found everywhere. The lady you referred to, the base of her skull was found. And then it was reported back to her family that unfortunately she since died. So there cannot be any justification for the manner in which the Hamas are carrying on what they call this fight on behalf of the Palestinians. What I see is that in the very near future, the Palestine state, when it emerges, will dissociate itself from this Hamas, who will be criminalized, and rightly so, and will be made to suffer for this violence, unwarranted violence that's been visited on Israel in the last 2 weeks.
What can be done from the perspective of the United Nations to address this debacle in a way that will be seen to be influential and fair to the Palestinians and to Israel? And do you still have confidence in the leadership of Antonio Guterres as the Secretary General of the United Nations?
I won't tell you a lie. The might of the United Nations gets reduced by the day. And you can see that from what is happening in Ukraine versus Russia on the one hand. Now we see it between the Israel and the Palestinians. There are very many other countries that are doing the job of the United Nations. And we must start to understand, especially even for developing countries, where we want to place the United Nations in the scheme of things. Now, singular countries are making efforts by themselves to intervene where you expect the United Nations to take a frontal stance. Now, the weakened stance of the United Nations is also not something that is possibly surprising, because the United Nations has been largely funded by the United States for a very long time. But even the United States is looking inwards, because you don't offer funds, you don't offer security without some trade going underneath. And if we have fragile economies in the United States, it means that there's no doubt that the US will start to look inwards. It's the same thing for the United Kingdom, where we are hoping that technology can help to shore up our funding and strengthen our economy. So singular states, including Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, have started to take on the responsibility of the United Nations, effectively decentralizing the hitherto powers that the United Nations was exercising. In fact, you see Saudi Arabia in the scheme of things, Turkey, and then even though China is taking a quiet stance, you do know that that's where the powers are being devolved to at this point. So what it then means is that there will be a solution, but it won't be led by United Nations. We simply don't have the capacity as United Nations to be able to deal with this directly. But of course, we can ride on European powers and some Western countries to be able to mediate in the crisis that we have found. So no, the United Nations has not taken the frontal stance in the same way it has checked its responsibilities with respect to Russia and Ukraine. It's the same we see here. But I'm very certain that the Middle East on one hand and the Western countries on the other can find a middle ground to settle crises going on within Gaza Strip at this time.
Mr. Oyeneji, you are in East Midlands in the UK. Is there a palpable rise in anti-Semitism in the UK at the moment? We've seen and heard reports from all over the world of demonstrations in universities, in the UK, in America, and all over the world, and the manner of those demonstrations at times turns out to be violent in nature. What's happening with the Jews in the UK at the moment? Do they feel safe?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that gives a cause for concern. I live in, if you like, a multicultural region, and there's an uneasy calm. Because even before the events of the 7th of October, there had been pockets of gatherings, okay, of Palestinians coming together and just speaking. I sensed it at the time that something was about to happen. I thought that we had fragile peace in the East Midlands, but it never occurred to me that it was going to happen in Israel. So it was there, the signs were there. We have an uneasy calm in the United Kingdom at this time. And the country and the Prime Minister stated that we have to raise terror alert. I would not in the least be surprised if we have major incidents in the coming days or weeks in the United Kingdom, specifically London. However, also Birmingham is possibly a hotspot. Security has been increased also in Leicester. We see more local enforcement. But what we need to do is to ensure that the government takes one stance. So in one breath, you find even the leader of the Labour, Keir Starmer, is having difficulty in managing the situation to call it what it is, which is terrorism. So all I'm saying is that what we see in Gaza is reflecting in our institutions, even in the United Kingdom, in politics, as we aim to have general elections in May next year. So the Labour won't want to call it terrorism because they expect that if the Tories have come out to call it terrorism, they want to do the exact opposite so that they can garner votes for themselves. But we have an uneasy calm, and we must be attentive to what the times are saying. We need to beef up security, and we need to ensure that we are not ambushed. So it's not just anti-Semitism for Jews, it's everybody just being careful, because any slight breakdown can become something major in the United Kingdom specifically.
Indeed, and even in the United States, Christopher Wray, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI director, has said that there is a real danger that there might be copycat terror attacks in the United States. And we thank you for your insight and your contribution this morning, Mr. Yinka Oyeniji, who joined us from East Midlands in the UK, International Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to learn watching your program. Thank you very much.
Much obliged. Still to come. Rehabilitation Center gives Nova Festival survivors chance to heal. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the final stretch of Israel-Hamas war on Channels Television this morning. Distribution of food and medical supplies is faltering in Gaza due to a chronic lack of fuel, looting of stores, choking of streets with rubble from Israeli shelling, and overcrowding caused by displacement of civilians. And despite an uptick in the trickle of supplies, the number of aid trucks entering Gaza, currently averaging 14 daily, remain tiny compared to the 400 trucks seen daily in normal times for a population of 2.3 million people now desperate for essentials like bread. UN Palestinian Refugee Agency says a break-in by hungry Gazans on Sunday at one of the two warehouses has complicated its work. The second warehouse near the Rafah border crossing with Egypt has also become harder to operate because 8,000 displaced people are sheltering there.
We are also facing challenges with supplies. Supplies that have run out because of the overwhelming need and the distribution, because of the fact that UNRWA continued to distribute from early on, but also because what's coming on these trucks, on this humanitarian convoy, is very, very little. It's only 1% of what Gaza used to bring. So we're asking for an increase in the number of these trucks. We also need fuel in these, on these trucks. We have not received any fuel, not UNRWA, not the whole of Gaza. No fuel has come into Gaza since the 7th of October. Look, we're facing huge challenges to our operation. First of all, the number of people who have sought shelter in UNRWA schools and facilities is 4 times more than what we had planned for in any worse of the worst scenarios, if you wish, right? So we are overwhelmed ourselves. Our own teams are overwhelmed and stretched, and they are themselves, many of them have become displaced. We have lost 67 colleagues to date. We have 14 distribution centers in Gaza. Before the war, we used to provide food aid to 1.2 million people across the Gaza Strip. We were forced to close these distribution centers down when the war began, and have gone to alternative ways of giving out the wheat, including giving wheat to bakeries across the Gaza Strip, where we have contributed as UNRWA to reducing the price of bread to half of it. Now, we have 2 very big warehouses. Unfortunately, one of them was broken into a couple of days ago. A lot was taken from it. That included mainly food items, so like wheat flour mainly, and some supplies like cleaning material.
Dozens of Egyptian volunteers at the Rafah crossing, meanwhile, are facilitating the movement of aid trucks into Gaza. The office manager of the Aid Foundation, who was at the crossing on Tuesday, Mohammed Rageh, says volunteers had been waiting for nearly 15 days, but recognized that the flow of trucks has increased in the last few days. According to the General Authority for Crossings and Borders in Gaza, Egyptian authorities told it that 81 Gazans who were severely wounded will be allowed to enter Egypt today to complete their treatment. The flow of aid to Gaza from Egypt has been slowed by an inspection team agreed with Israel, in which trucks drive from Egypt's Rafah along the Egypt-Israel border before returning towards Gaza. Now, after seeing a video of their 22-year-old daughter, Shani Look, a German-Israeli national, paraded around by Hamas terrorists in Gaza, her parents, Nassim and Ricarda, were still hopeful that their daughter was alive and being held hostage. But on Monday, after nearly 3 weeks of waiting, those hopes were dashed. Israeli forensics investigators informed them that they had identified a fragment of Shani's skull and confirmed that she had been killed during the Hamas October 7 assault across southern Israel.
You know, as a father, I'm sad that all this happened. But from the other hand, I'm a little bit relieved because, first of all, she didn't suffer. She died right on spot while driving, actually. Before driving. And she didn't suffer at all.
They took only the body.
And they took only the body to Gaza to do whatever they want there. I don't care. And she never suffered. Just before that, she was dancing all night in the party. And she was with her best friends, and she was happy and dancing and hugging and loving. And few minutes, I'm sure it was few seconds actually, of fear from the unknown and death. But this contrast between dancing and beauty and love and happiness.
But she was also a very unconventional girl, let's say. She really knew exactly what she wants to do. She was independent. She lived in Tel Aviv and was earning her own money. But she was happy and she enjoyed and had fun and traveled. So she really used the time to do all the beautiful things she wanted to do. At least that's we know.
Finally, survivors of the Nova Festival attack on October 7 are looking for a space to heal themselves from the trauma in a rehabilitation center in central Israel. Surrounded by nature, Run It Farm allows young festival goers to talk through the experience and provides them with a relaxing setting that will encourage them to open up with psychologists and consultants. The Run It Farm was set up immediately after the Hamas terrorists infiltrated the south of Israel. Within the first 2 weeks, the center had treated over 2,000 survivors from the festival.
Opened this immediately, not knowing exactly what we're going to need. Within the first day, we had many psychologists and psychiatrists, and people came so frozen, and it was so hard for them to be verbal. So we had them sitting on pillows, and we had them doing reflexology or singing with the guitar, and slowly they opened up. And then we had the flow going so they could be speaking to psychologists or to practitioners in a way that was a lot more spontaneous. We've had people come here every single day that have told us that this is, after being here, it's the first time they could sleep. After being here was the first time they ate, and that their body could calm down in a way that it couldn't happen anywhere else.
Been in a party, and I gotta say that was the best party I've been in my whole life. It was amazing, man. People from all the world just smiling, good people. And it's letting me just pull out what's happened and talk about it with good people who wants to help.
And that's where we leave it this morning for Israel-Hamas war on Channels Television. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.